I'm really excited to have so many people from around the world joining us tonight for this tax advocacy webinar. If you would like to put in the chat box where you are joining us from and where you vote, that would be fun. You can go ahead and do that anytime. As you know, advocating for tax relief for Americans abroad is something that Democrats abroad has been doing for many, many years. In fact, recently the Taxation Task Force celebrated its 10th birthday. And they have also had a major win this week in introducing legislation that would simplify tax filing requirements for Americans abroad. I am going to let our guest speaker explain all of this because she is certainly the expert on this topic. We are really grateful to have Carmelan Polchi with us tonight. Carmelan is the chair of the DA Taxation Task Force. She's served in that role since 2014 and served on the task force since it was formed 10 years ago. So that is some amazing dedication. Her team currently includes 12 volunteers. Half of them are subject matter experts with careers in law, finance, tax, and government. The other half have a range of backgrounds but share a commitment to executing effective campaigns aimed at persuading Congress to provide tax relief to Americans abroad. Carmelan lives in Sydney, Australia, and has also lived in Singapore and Bolivia. And she votes in Pennsylvania. So before I turn this over to Carmelan, I just want to say at the end, we will do questions. If you have a question that occurs to you, type * hand up into the chat box, and I'm gonna model how that goes. Looks like that. And Andres is going to keep the queue for questions. So what he will see when you type * hand up, he'll write your name and keep it in a box in order of the questions. Please don't use the hand up feature in Zoom because we are not able to really keep track of that in a very orderly way. So I think that we are ready to go, and I'm just going to hand it over to Andres.
Yeah, one more thing. So we'll try to leave the questions to the end. And yes, before we start with the Q&A portion, I'll stop the recording so that we're not recording, any sort of specific questions that people may have. Not that we're giving tax advice, all those caveats apply. So hand it over the floor. Okay, replace spotlight. All right.
All right, go ahead, Carmelan.
Hi everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar. I really appreciate the time. One of the things that the Tax Task Force really tries to do is communicate continuously and clearly with the members of Democrats abroad so that you understand what we're doing. And it's there's so many great things going on in Democrats abroad these days and so many great programs being thrown at you for participating that it's hard to squeeze in there. So I'm very grateful that that I was invited by DA Portugal to make this presentation, and thank you so much for being here. So this presentation is about how we are advocating for tax reform for the Americans abroad community. So of course it's Democrats abroad, but this is a nonpartisan issue. It impacts everyone who lives outside the United States. So we see ourselves as fighting for the community as a whole. And that's important because the discussions that we have in Congress are certainly nonpartisan. We talk to both sides, both houses and both sides of politics. So we're representing the whole community. So first, I'm going to start with the end in mind. First, the good news is that we have a very exciting bill. We can go on to the next slide. Thank you. Right, so it is, it's a short form certification for Americans abroad. That's the language that we're using to talk about it. But what it calls on Treasury to create a form that is going to vastly simplify filing for ordinary earners, ordinary Americans abroad who have ordinary types of income and who represent something like 75% of our community. These are people who are earning either earning or living on their retirement benefits, and they find the task of filing exceedingly complex. It's very stressful, and they are forced to engage tax return preparers to help them file. This is going to remove from their life this range of forms that they are currently filing, and it'll be a single form that enables them to say who they are, what they earn, the tax and the tax that they're already paying. Obviously, it will help them demonstrate that they are Americans abroad for tax purposes, so non-residents. But this is going to be something that we can prepare without the need for professional advice and support. The other thing that this bill does is it expands the foreign earned income exclusion. I'm not going to get into that in a lot of detail, but there are categories of income that are excluded from the foreign earned income exclusion, and the Americans abroad who have some of those types of incomes are some of the most vulnerable amongst us. So now they'll be included in the foreign earned income exclusion. So that's a topic for a larger conversation. What I want to draw attention to is, go on to the next slide, is now what happens. So a couple of bits of acknowledgement. We are exceedingly grateful to Representative Don Beyer of the Virginia 8 because he's the champion for this reform. He was an ambassador to Switzerland for many years. He understands our community. He was concerned enough to help us draft this reform that is going to help most of us and into a bill. But at the moment, it would be introduced, it's going to be introduced either later this week or early next week as a standalone bill. And that is not what we want. We don't want a standalone bill. We want this provision to be included in legislation that is going to be passed this year. So we've been speaking to Congress about this reform all year long. We've got a small stable of members of the House of Representatives who are already on board as supporting it. Now we need to take that support and this language and get this provision included into the Senate's version of the Build Back Better bill. So that's the social spending bill that Congress is still working through the details of. We have a very good idea about this sorts of jobs programs, climate action, health care, that is going to be in childcare, that's going to be included in that, but it's incomplete at this moment. It is not agreed. The action on that bill is going to move to the Senate, and our opportunity is to get this provision into the Senate version of the bill, and that's the work that we're doing this week. We've got some great meetings set up, including with the key staff members of the chair of the Senate Finance Committee. That's Senator Ron Wyden. He really is going to run the table on this, and so we're exactly in the right place at exactly the right time. Now we just have to persuade. So that's happening at the moment, and to help us do that, we are going to be asking Americans around the world who care about this reform to reach out to their members of Congress. So look out for a campaign that you can engage in if this is something that you want to support. We hope you will. And we are going to engage as many people as possible to speak to the members of Congress, their representative and their senators about the need for this reform and for it to be included in legislation this year. As I said, we've already got some really important key leaders in the House of Representatives on board. We're going to be speaking to the Senate about that. We've been briefing them all along, but now that we have the language, now we can have a detailed discussion about how it fits into the bill, the Build Back Better bill. And we will engage our friends in Congress. There is a small group of members in both houses who routinely come to our communities and are informed and knowledgeable about the sort of issues that we face. And these are going to be, we think, our champions to get this done. And most importantly, we just cannot give up. We understand from reporting today that from Chuck Schumer that it looks like the Build Back Better bill discussion is going to leak into December. So we've got time to do this, and we just need to keep pushing. We need to keep talking about this. We need to keep making clear what this bill does and what it doesn't do, because there's always going to be concerns in Congress that bills like this are going to end up being vulnerable to abuse. So we talk about that, and we don't give up. We keep fighting straight to the end. Okay, so next slide, thanks. Now I'm going to go back in time a little bit so that you understand where some of this came from. As Christy said, this task force was formed 10 years ago to look at FATCA and how it was going to impact Americans abroad. The Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act was passed as part of the HIRE Act, one of the major pieces of legislation that helped the economy recover from the global financial crisis. And this provision has greatly complicated people's lives. At that time, we didn't know how. We just knew that a big change was coming. So we created this task force to speak to Congress, to understand how this was going to impact the Americans abroad community and speak to Congress about what we were experiencing. So it's always been a challenge to get Congress to understand us. We've had to do a lot of educating over the years and a lot of explaining. There's a lot of apocryphal stereotypes about the Americans abroad community. And we've had to maintain a consistent level of engagement with Congress to keep explaining to them who we are, that we're actually not a lot different from Americans who live inside the United States in terms of age profile and income profile and home ownership, and so that they understand that we're not all living, sorry, Marion, in the south of France on yachts and sipping champagne and what have you, that we are just ordinary Americans. We care, we live abroad, but we still care about the country, we care about public policy, and we are impacted by policy that is created without due consideration for how it impacts us. So we've undertaken a lot of research over time. We've published reports in all of these years. But as I said, we struggle to get the right amount of attention. So, you know, in order to be taken seriously, when you're talking about tax, you have to know what you're talking about. You have to come to Congress with a broad understanding of how tax policy works, how it's created, and how it's implemented, how it's actually administered. And we've worked very hard over the years to demonstrate that we are policy advocates to be taken seriously. And thought leadership has been of paramount importance in us achieving that. We've published briefing documents and position papers. We've taken every opportunity to make submissions to Congress, to these important policy committees and subcommittees, so that they understand that we are a serious player in the policy debate, and that has led us to where we are today, where we can get really good meetings with the right people at the right time. And all of those papers, all of those submissions, all of that research has been paramount to us building a profile of an advocacy group that can be taken seriously. And that's why we get meetings. And that's why they listen to us when we come and we talk to them about our policy recommendations. Over time, we've also been a host of many grassroots campaigns, getting all the community who care about tax reform to speak to Congress, and because the most persuasive things is the stories that you all have to tell about the experience that you're having with US taxation. As I said, we briefed Congress, we are educating them, and we are developing support for our reform proposals. And the other thing that we've done, I mean, I know that VA Canada and some of the other country committees have been doing this for a long time, but we hold these Taxation 101 webinars to help people to put information into the hands of our members about taxation, about how to come into compliance if you're not into compliance, what some of the issues are that you're dealing with. This week there was a webinar about investing. At an hour from now, there's another webinar aimed at Latin America and South America that talks about the issues relevant to those places, because as we know, tax policy differs from place to place depending on the double taxation treaty that you have. So this is another area that we have developed in order to fully present as tax activists and advocates. This is what we call our 5-prong strategy for doing the work that we do. Okay, so we're going to move on now. Okay, so overall, over the years, our goals have been pretty simple. Eliminate double taxation. There are many types of income that we have as Americans abroad that are not protected from the foreign earned income exclusion. And we need to, one of our goals is to eliminate double taxation. Removing barriers to banking, saving, and investing. So barriers to banking have arisen because of foreign account reporting. There are banks who are choosing to not bank Americans abroad so that they don't have to deal with the compliance demands of the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, FATCA. So we're working on that. We're working on the blue sky laws and PFIC laws. All of these cause or erect barriers to Americans abroad who are just trying to save for the future. And lastly on this list is simplifying filing, which is the real obstacle for 60 or to 70% of Americans abroad. The real obstacle is they've lived in the United States, they've filed as US citizens, and then they move abroad and they go to prepare their tax filing, and it's a completely different exercise. The forms are different, and they may be dealing with weaknesses in the double taxation treaty. I mean, some countries like the UK and Canada have really good double taxation treaties, but they are in the minority. Many countries have really poor or out of date taxation treaties, and things that are really important to people, like their retirement benefits, are some of these income areas that are being double taxed. So these are our policy goals. And over time, we've arrived at these reform goals. This is what we've been trying to achieve. So we've been talking to Congress for a long time about a switch from our current system of citizenship-based taxation to residency-based taxation, because that is the most comprehensive means of resolving the vast litany of issues that the tax code causes for Americans abroad. There's a lot of concerns in Congress about that. They don't have a good enough feel for how a switch like this would impact revenue. So we work in close collaboration with our very good friends at American Citizens Abroad, who are doing that work. They've invested tens of thousands of dollars over time to build a model to reflect how residency-based taxation is going to impact Americans abroad and the federal government. That work is still going on. Unfortunately, they did a huge amount of work this year, and we were expecting that research to be finished about mid-year. Unfortunately, it hasn't been finished in enough time to use it to impact lawmaking this year, and that was really important. The reforms that we're talking about, something as big as a switch to residency-based taxation, is always going to be a very difficult thing to achieve as a standalone bill. It really needs to be enacted as part of a bigger bill, a bigger reform movement by government, by Congress. And this year would have been the year to do that, ideally, if we had had the data to support our reform recommendation. But that wasn't going to happen. We weren't going to have the information that we needed to make really persuasive arguments. Congress also is working very hard to lift the nation back up off its knees to recover from the pandemic. We passed an enormous spending bill in March of this year, the American Rescue Plan. What Congress was going to be looking for next is a bill that was fully paid for. And that's why those numbers were so important. We needed to demonstrate what the cost of a reform like this was going to be, and we weren't going to get there. So we made a decision in around Easter time that we really couldn't waste this year with a push towards residency-based taxation that could fail spectacularly, because then we would have achieved nothing for Americans abroad. And we couldn't let that happen. So the tax task force, as you were hearing earlier, is a group of people, some of whom are very dedicated campaigners, but most of whom are policy experts. They're lawyers, they're tax return preparers, they work in the finance industry. And we came together as a team to clarify what our goals were going to be for this year. And we presented them to the DPCA voting members, the body of elected representatives from all the countries around the world. And we said, this is what we want to achieve this year. And we were given a consent to do that. We passed a resolution. And so all of this work that's been going on over so many years on a switch to residency-based taxation has been set aside. That is still our long-term goal, but we had to decide what we could achieve this year, and it was going to be something less than that, something other than that, including the filing simplification. The rest of this list here are also things that we are committed to over the long term, but we're going to move on to the next slide now. Okay, so this is, I've sort of already said this, Congress is spending trillions in dollars this year. There was these two bills that were going to be vehicles for us to attach our reform recommendations to. We knew that Congress was looking for revenue to support any spending that was done. We knew we had more to do to educate Congress about residency-based taxation and how it could be implemented in a way that didn't open up tax loopholes for anybody and everybody to set up either real or pretend offshore residency and get out of paying taxes. So we had to establish what we could achieve this year. And now I want to move on to the next slide. And these are our reform recommendations for 2021, a filing modification for Americans abroad, most of whom go to an enormous amount of trouble and expense to file their tax return just to submit a return that shows that they owe no US tax. So that was our first reform. This is what we have a bill. The second reform was aimed at the GILTI tax. The GILTI tax probably understood really, really well by those who are hit by it, but not by those who don't have a business, don't run a business abroad. So the GILTI tax was in a sentence was meant for Googles and the Apples and the Starbucks of the world who have offshore subsidiaries where they are generating profits, but keeping those profits away from the IRS. But it also hits small businesses that are run by up to 20% of Americans abroad. It's had a devastating effect on them. We published some research earlier this year that indicated that they're having to close their business. They're not able to expand them or even plan for the future. They're just being devastated by this. So that was another one of our reforms this year. The last reform, number 3, was some updates to foreign account compliance, especially eliminating the duplication. Most of Americans abroad file the FBAR report. Some also have to file a FATCA report, and it's exactly the same information submitted on 2 different forms to 2 different departments of the same agency of government. So it's kind of crazy. And we're looking for some reforms there. Plus, we have for a long time had a FATCA bill, the Overseas Americans Financial Access Act, that was reintroduced a week or so ago. We still support that. Also, a Commission on Americans Living Abroad, which would be a body empowered to look at a great many issues relevant to Americans abroad. And then we're also continuously asking for improved IRS service to the Americans abroad community. We are vastly underserved as a community. And the foreign earned income exclusion expansion, which I touched on earlier. So these are the reforms that we've been talking to Congress about. I think I'm going to stop right there, actually, because we're about halfway through, and I've spoken a lot, and I would like to know what issues and what questions and what concerns you. So I'm going to stop right there. There are more slides here that discuss these reforms in greater detail. So you'll all be receiving these slides with more information. But I think it's probably helpful now if I listen.